Hey everybody, thanks for joining us on another episode of CodeChat. I'm your host, Jeremy Foster, and I'm talking today to Greg Doerr from Clear Contract. How you doing today, Greg?
Pretty good. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good. Yep, we're still having sunny days in Seattle, so you can't beat that.
Yep, and it cooled down a little bit from the weekend.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm having to do like house heat management, and last night was nice, just being able to open the doors and let some cold air blow through the house.
Yep.
Greg and his team are part of the Microsoft Ventures Accelerator that you've been hearing me talk a lot about, and his group is a real exciting one called, like I said, Clear Contract. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Clear Contract and what you guys do?
So Clear Contract is basically a platform that helps people, business professionals, attorneys, people like that, manage the contract execution process. So traditionally that's been done with Word documents, PDF, things like that, transferred back and forth between the various parties using email. Certainly works, but when you get into these more complex negotiations where you're dealing with multiple people, it can become problematic to manage what's the current version of the document I'm working on, who has the latest version of the document. I know there's an action waiting to be taken on it, but I don't know who's doing it, things like that. So what we set out to do is build a platform that allows people to really focus on the negotiation piece itself, which is hard enough when you're dealing with multiple parties, and let us handle all the administrative issues that typically surround that. Again, tracking those version numbers, having a great log so you know who did what, who made what change and things like that, while also protecting the confidentiality of the process, making sure that only the people you authorize can see the documents, controlling access, things like that.
Yeah.
And so that's, we're targeting this at those professionals that negotiate contracts for a living, but also those people that have to do it just as a matter of course of their job,
right,
and perhaps don't like it all that much.
Yeah.
Let's take some of that messy process out, use the computer to automate most of that, and let you focus on where you really add value.
So I wonder if some companies might be themselves, like you mentioned, negotiators, and they work in the middle, they work on the contracts, and they'll be living and breathing in a tool set like this, right?
Absolutely.
That would
Absolutely.
be wonderful.
Yeah, and one of the things we focused on is there's a couple applications out there that do similar things, but they're really focused on doing HTML documents and things like that. What we know, and I spent 35 years in business and have negotiated lots of contracts, you negotiate contracts in Word, and that's what everybody's used to doing it. And so we provide that integration with the Office suite, so you can use Word documents, Excel, things like that, but you maintain your document in that native format, so you don't have to worry about translation errors. You have all the full fidelity that you get out of Office, but with all this safety wrapper kind of built around it.
Office in Word specifically is just such a general tool that it doesn't have the specific workflow management for something like contract negotiation.
Right. That's correct.
That's excellent.
Yep.
So what stage is it at? Can you tell us, do you guys have a beta or?
So our beta launched at beginning of June.
All right, that's recent.
We're getting really excited. Obviously, we have Pitch Week this week with Ventures. We've got a lot of good interest in there. We've got some folks on the platform already kind of banging at it, getting a lot of good feedback.
Good.
Fixing a lot of little bugs, and that's to be expected when you're in beta. We hope to come out of beta into full production probably sometime in August.
Okay.
But things have been going very well.
All right. Why don't you tell us about your history, your career, and how you got to this point where you're working as a developer on a startup like this?
Okay.
A lot of the folks that are watching are developers, and I think they'll relate with a story like that.
Sure. So I've been in technology in various forms for 35 years. I started out writing assembly on 8-bits, burning EEPROMs all day long and doing things like that. Had a pretty good career. I got into telecom about 25 years ago, and just basically walked up the ladder for a couple of companies. I was COO and CTO of a company that we sold about 4 years ago. Started another startup and have been doing a lot of development for the past 5 years real hard. Sold that one intellectual property-wise about a year and a half ago, and then was looking for something to do. Ran into the Clear Contract guys. They're Chicago boys just like I am, and they were looking for someone to help them take it to the next level, and we saw a meeting of the minds and shared a vision, and here we are.
Now, when you approach a startup like this, with the interest of working there and helping with the startup, do you have to not only kind of see the technology and stuff, but do you have to develop or have a passion for what it is that they're doing? Do you have to have a clear vision for the ability to succeed in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't, it's very difficult, especially at a startup, when you don't have real good ironclad requirements. What are we building, right?
Yeah, right.
So you're going to spend a lot of time dealing with your fellow founders, your early adopter customers, people like that. going through what are the use cases, what are we really trying to build, looking at all those little edge cases that we invariably run into as developers, and making sure you have good answers for those. And that's really, part developer, it's part business person, it's part end user, and you have to be able to wear all of those hats. So the more experience you have, the more passionate you are about the problem you're trying to solve, obviously the better solutions you're going to build.
Yeah. I think that folks might assume, based on just your ability to speak and represent yourself, that you're on the business side, but you're actually a technical guy, right?
I am. So I spent a lot of years in business, but after selling the one big company a couple of years ago, this is.
That's what you enjoy.
I enjoy this, and I tell you what, going from my history 30 years ago, dealing with command line stuff, and all you had were text editors. There was no such thing as Code Complete. There were no IDEs. There were no advanced editors and things like that. To the world today, where you have all this open source knowledge out there that you can tap into, all the communication tools that we have to collaborate together, whether it's sitting in a room together or sitting 3,000 miles apart. It's a totally different ballgame, and it's so much more enjoyable than it was. You still get all of those great teamwork aspects of doing development with a group, but you have all the flexibility to be able to start on a shoestring budget. You don't have to build a team of 15 people to go build a product anymore. You can do it with 1 or 2 people, and that's really probably for me the most exciting piece about this whole time we're in right now.
Yeah. So I think about this a lot. I'm not quite as far back, but I did do my fair share of Valterra programming and FPGAs and a little bit of assembly. I never touched a punch card, I have to admit.
CS 101, I did punch cards, and I'm glad that's gone, because that was not fun.
But I wonder now, I still feel like we have 42 different ways of doing things. And when I talk to student developers, I go to a university or even to a middle or high school, and there are these students that are saying, this is a field I'd love to be in, but it overwhelms me. And I go, I wonder why it is that it's still overwhelming, because we have acquired so much power. Our machines are dramatically more powerful. Our code is dramatically simpler in a sense, and yet when they want to put together a solution, it's still overwhelming. There are so many different ways of doing it.
Yep. Yeah, it's to a certain extent, a lot of the programming decisions we make end up being quasi-religious debates, right? Because we all have personal preferences, and those are largely shaped by how we got into development.
Totally.
The tools we first used, the things we're comfortable with. I started out in assembler. I got into C fairly quickly after that. Went up through C++. So I'm more comfortable and most comfortable in that world. So the C++, C#, Java, things like that, I'm very, very comfortable with, and languages that are derived from that. That being said, probably one of the neatest things about this time is the rise of the domain-specific languages, where you're using a specific language to solve a specific problem, or that language is targeted at solving that problem.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I think is challenging for a novice developer, is trying to become fluent in the various languages that are out there, right? So it's some of it is knowledge capture, but the other piece of it is being comfortable enough making a decision to go and try something, right?
Yeah.
So the great thing is you can probably whip up an evaluation solution for pretty much any problem in a couple of weeks. Just, you're not going to solve all the weird edge cases. It's not going to be bulletproof code. It's going to be test stuff. But at least it allows you to test out your theories, test out your approach and things like that, without becoming so far down the road that you've spent 2 months building something that you're going to throw away.
Yeah.
And I think the point here is try it.
Yeah.
Try it out. If it doesn't work, throw it out, try something else.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lesson we all need to do more often, is just, do those little experiments, see if they work. If they do, great. Elaborate on it, build better code, or throw that out and start over in a more professional manner. But it still allows you to get more experience with these little different pieces without having to worry about writing 1,000 lines of code and then throwing it out.
And that's often a really deliberate it requires a deliberate and intentional choice to go outside of your comfort zone. And this is just a primitive human thing. It doesn't matter what field you're in. I think that you're going to have to get out of your comfort zone and try new things, and expect and accept the fact that through the process you're not going to be comfortable. When you're a beginning developer and you're trying to understand any of these concepts, you're not going to be comfortable, and you have to be okay with that and keep going.
Yeah, but I mean, the advantage again we have today is that you can go on Stack Overflow, you can go on CodePlex, you can go on all these different sites and ask questions and do research yourself and things like that. And I think, at least for me, the process of asking questions, oftentimes when I'm trying to figure out how to phrase the question and ask the question in a way that people will get. Half the time, I solve my own problem by structuring the question,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's
because
right.
it causes a thought process. Say, oh, I should try this.
You have to order your thoughts.
Absolutely.
And then before you've even before you even know enough to run into a problem, you can start at things like Pluralsight or MVA
Yep.
or Code School, Codecademy. There's all these sites that
Yeah.
you can go to just say, I assume I know nothing and start telling me about this.
Resources are everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Now you guys have done a pretty big migration in your data area, and we want to kind of drill in on that today. You've migrated from Cassandra to DocumentDB. Can you
That's
tell
correct.
us some of the reasons? I mean, doing a migration is quite a consideration. It has to not just be par, it has to be better in order to justify
Sure.
it. So tell us about that.
So I've been doing Cassandra work for almost 5 years here. Very comfortable with it. I know a lot of the ups and the downs and things where you're going to get caught. So when we started building Clear Contract, doing that for me was a natural extension of it. I certainly had to think a certain way when you build your data model. You got to build for query and things like that. And it worked very well. So we were able to build the model. We got the platform up and running in an alpha mode in about 2.5 months. It worked. It kind of met all of our performance goals. When we got out here to Seattle and we started getting involved with the Microsoft Ventures program, we got a lot of exposure to Azure and all the various tools that are on Azure. And actually, probably a week into the program, I attended a presentation by one of the DocDB program managers. He came out to Seattle and he gave us a presentation for about an hour and a half and was very intrigued. One of the things that I like about it is the notion that every single field in your JSON object is indexed. And if you play with wide row stuff like NoSQL, you know that you have to explicitly build the indexes you need in order to remain performant and not exceed row size and things like that. Which means if you need to add features at some point in time in the future, or you have these weird edge cases where you need to do some funky little queries, you actually have to build that into your data model so that you can query appropriately and get the right data sets back. One of the neat things about DocumentDB is that ability to, without having to modify your data model a whole lot, go in and query on those specific fields. Now, it may not be the fastest thing in the world, but oftentimes when you're talking about these little edge cases, that's okay, right? So, the reduction in performance is more than offset by the simplicity of not having to maintain all these separate indices. The other big consideration for us is when you deal with a NoSQL database, specifically Cassandra in this case, others have different restrictions. You have to build your cluster for your expected peak load, right? So they're very horizontally scalable, but they're horizontally scalable in bulk over time, right? So you may start out with a 4-node cluster, and as traffic or volume grows, you may need to add 6 or 8 or 10.
So like as your business grows, it's okay.
Right.
It's
so
good
so at that macro level, you need to scale your database, and those do exceedingly well at that. What they don't do quite as well is adapt to more granular changes in demand. So you look at a typical business application like we're developing, it's going to be used heavily Monday through Friday, right, during the business day. So starting at 7 a.m. on the East Coast, ending at maybe 6 p.m. out here on the West Coast. And then Saturdays and Sundays and the rest of the time, your traffic volumes are going to go maybe 10% of that.
Yeah, right.
And so with the way these databases work and the clusters are built, you end up paying for that peak load 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Because if you try to shrink your cluster down, you end up rebalancing keys all the time, which is horribly inefficient and scares the crap out of me. So I wouldn't do that in a production environment. When we started looking at DocumentDB, it really gave us a better way to manage the query volume and the query traffic against our data set. And we're looking at price-wise a comparison between say 15 to 20 grand for running an 8-node Cassandra cluster to maybe $1,500 a month running a DocumentDB,
especially for a startup.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah, I mean that's a big number. I mean that's 10%.
Yeah.
So and that's a big needle mover for us. So I think those two things combined really helped run that decision for us. And we went and did exactly what we talked about earlier. We ran a couple of test cases. Built the model, beat on it for a little bit. Figured out what we had to build from a data access layer, built that, and from the time we made the decision to the time we went into testing, with a revamped application was about 3.5 weeks. So the transition was relatively simple.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Man, that's just a no-brainer. And even if you don't have a full quantification of how much that the savings are going to be, you know, 10%
Yeah.
of the original, even if it's going to be, you know, less than 50%, this is still going to be
That's huge.
a net gain. And,
Yep.
and you said that the migration didn't take very long. So
No,
that's
the
awesome.
migration was actually really easy. You know, one of the big advantages of what DocumentDB brings, in addition to, you know, simplification of the data model and the query structures, is the notion that you're truly storing JSON objects, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, with all the polymorphism that comes along with that. So rather than having to have this really complex data access layer where you're translating between your internal object model and what you're actually storing in your data store, you have a lot more flexibility to store real objects. And certainly there's not necessarily always going to be a one-to-one. You may need to do some translation, but it's nowhere near as complex as what we're probably all used to doing, you know, especially back in the days when you had to do that with a relational database.
Okay, so you're saying that, like my experience with relational databases, I remember the 3 fundamental ways to store inherited, you know, polymorphic data in a database, and you're talking about you have to kind of design that into your database, and then in your data access layer, you have to recognize that. So when you pull things out,
Right.
it's giving you things that are of a type, whether it's an inherited type or a base type or whatever. But that's not as necessary in your data access layer anymore.
No, I mean, it's our application is primarily written in Java, so we still do some of that. So we do translation from JSON into the real Java objects. But it's very easy to do. You know, we basically do with a type indicator that sits on the object, and then our serialization layer takes care of all that. And that's just a commercial, you know, open source library. It's actually Jersey. If you happen to be writing in Node.js or something like that, it's even easier because then there's no translation at all. You're storing an honest JSON object.
Yeah.
So that translation, you know, to JavaScript is piece of cake.
Yeah, I love that. I know one of the big features in DocumentDB is the persistence models. It's got 4 different persistence models. What are you guys using? Are you using eventual or immediate? Or?
So we're using a little of both. So we actually have a file access structure that we've built on top of it. We store the metadata and things like that in DocumentDB, and that uses immediate consistency. And then we actually store the file data is on Azure Storage Blob. And then the DocumentDB points to those. From a eventual consistency method, that's pretty much everything else we store is all eventual, just because we don't have a lot of object contention anyway.
Okay.
And so that actually works out really well for us.
Okay. And you were mentioning that you have a caching layer. So if you've got a caching layer, then there's just kind of a natural fit between eventual consistency. You're not going to need this thing for how long is your cache?
60 seconds.
Okay, yeah. So you know, this thing's eventually going to be there, and by eventual, it's just going to be a few seconds.
Right,
probably.
right.
Yeah.
And you know, we built that really to handle the case where in different places in your code, you need to retrieve the same object a couple of times. Fairly common use case. And having that little data cache layer there, it was almost a 10x improvement in performance for us. And again, the reduction in consistency is inconsequential for us, at least for our application.
Yeah. The caching, the advantages of caching are just gigantic.
Yep.
We were looking at the sandbox that's available on DocumentDB.com, the kind of the first-party Azure documentation for DocumentDB, and thought it might be fun if you just show us a couple things in the playground here for how DocumentDB works.
Yeah. So you know, we've got a little query here. This is just basically the stock query that I modified a little bit from the join example. And this really shows one of the things that you have to take into consideration when you think about how you're building your queries in DocumentDB. So, you know, it's not uncommon for us to have, you know, store an array of objects, right? Or an array of, you know, string tags or something for an object, and you want to find all of the objects that match or have that string tag in there. So normally you just run a normal array, and you'd have, you know, and you kind of see the description here where it says blueberries, canned, heavy syrup, solids, and liquids, blah, blah, blah. Normally you'd probably see an array tags, and you just see blueberries, canned, heavy syrup, blah, blah, blah.
Oh yeah.
Right. With DocumentDB, in order to be able to query on that, you have to use this join syntax here, where it actually pulls from the tags field, right? And you're looking for food.tags, so that's the parent object is food, tags is your field, and you want to find something. You know, this right here is just querying on the ID. But if I said, we wrote this and said, we're food. We're tag equals blueberries, we'd get the same object back. So you have to build your array to be a little bit different. So rather than having the actual data element there, you actually have an object with a named field, and that's so you can do the join query properly.
Kind of like an object wrapper. But what's interesting here is that this is a single collection in DocumentDB,
That's correct.
right?
That's correct.
So we are in the concept in relational databases is everything's a separate table, and I can join tables.
Right.
But here we have a document that has a nested array,
Right.
and I'm joining from the food, the top level. I'm joining to one of the
Fields,
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it is very impressive, and so there's, one of the trade-offs you have to make with DocumentDB is there is a built-in bias, I think, to build big objects, right? So you include everything in the kitchen sink in there. Obviously, you have to balance that against I need some sort of access control mechanism on there. And if you have eventual consistency on there, you probably don't want to be storing massive objects, right? Because you're going to end up with version conflicts and things like that you're going to have to deal with.
Yeah.
So, there's obviously a happy medium between how complex and large your objects are and what kind of different access mechanisms.
And there's a maximum limit of 512K per document, right?
Yes.
So you can't go above that, at least at this point.
Right, which realistically is pretty big.
It's huge.
Not a lot of people that are used to writing relational databases have table rows that are 512K. That's crazy.
Right. Okay, so what if I want to filter this or do anything else like that?
Yeah, you can just extend wheres. You have there's an in join, so you can say so I could rewrite this and say if name in blueberries or cherries, and then you'd get all the documents that had blueberries or cherries. So you can do that as well.
And SQL itself is not actually happening here. It's just using this syntax in order to query a modern NoSQL document database.
Yeah, it's for people who are used to T-SQL or things like that, it is nowhere near as expressive. It's fairly restrictive in comparison, but given what you're querying and what you're trying to build, it's a nice compromise between performance and things like that.
Well, especially because in SQL, I'm usually trying to compose some complex query so that what comes back is a row that looks exactly like what I want it to.
Right.
Whereas here, oftentimes, I think you're just trying to get the document. And once you have the document, then in your consuming code, you're going to use that the way that you see fit.
Yeah,
pull
absolutely.
the fields
Yeah,
out.
absolutely. I mean, you can do, so I could write this query to select only certain fields out of here. And if I'm just trying to get a certain data set out, that makes sense. The only drawback to that is you can't selectively update a record or an object in DocumentDB. So you have to pull the object out, modify it, and then write the whole thing back.
Okay. In other words, you can't selectively update a field?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So, but again, for what we found, as long as you structure your objects correctly, we haven't found that to be an issue.
Right. Well, that's exciting. I'm glad that it's not only, I find as a developer, I find this kind of a fun, expressive way to write my data. It feels like the client. I write a lot of JavaScript, so it feels like the client code that I'm writing. It's JSON, right? It's the same thing.
It's right there.
But then also the ability to deliver massive financial and performance gains to the company is excellent.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah, we're very, very pleased. We've, like I said, we've been on beta since early June. So far, so good. We've had 0 issues. It's been solid, rock solid, and there's wood here somewhere. We'll be knocking on it. But we're very happy with the decision.
Excellent. Okay, well, we're running out of time. Is there anything else you want to add? You want to tell developers?
No, I think the biggest one, we talked about it earlier, is don't be afraid to try new stuff, and don't be afraid to throw stuff out.
Yeah.
Right. If you make a bad decision, catch it as early as you can and fix it.
Yeah.
Don't live with it, because it'll bite you at some point.
That's awesome. And certainly if you're in the a business space where you deal with contracts, which is quite popular, check out Clear Contracts since they're in beta right now. So that's all. Thanks for joining me, Greg.
Thanks, Jeremy.
And thanks for watching CodeChat. We'll see you next time.